What does a single act of kindness truly cost? For Khloe Miller, a struggling waitress drowning in debt and despair, defending a homeless man from a callous customer, was just another Tuesday. An instinct. She had no idea that the quiet man in the corner booth, the one nursing a single cup of black coffee for 2 hours, was about to place a value on her compassion. A value that would not only shatter her world, but rebuild it from the ashes. This isn't a fairy tale of a princess and a prince. This is the story of how one decent moment can ignite a war within a billion-dollar empire. The smell of stale coffee and burnt bacon was the perfume of Khloe Miller's life. It clung to her cheap polyester uniform, her hair, and she swore the very fabric of her soul. The morning grind diner wasn't a career. It was a cage made of cracked linoleum floors and endless refill requests. Each clatter of plates, each shrill laugh, was a tick of the clock counting down the seconds of her life she was trading for minimum wage plus whatever loose change guilt-tripped patrons left behind. Today was particularly grueling. A Tuesday, the cruelest day of the week, holding none of the weekend's residual joy nor the promise of Friday's approach. Her feet throbbed in her worn-out sneakers, a dull ache that radiated up her spine. Her thoughts were a frantic storm of numbers: $4,287 for her mother's last hospital visit, $1,800 for the next month's rent on their tiny, drafty apartment, the ever-present, soul-crushing mountain of student loans for an art degree she'd never had the chance to finish. She was just 25, but she felt ancient. The vibrant, paint-splattered girl who once dreamed of galleries in Soho had been bleached out, replaced by this grayscale version of herself, defined only by her exhaustion and her anxiety. Her section was full. A gaggle of college students dissecting a lecture, a pair of construction workers wolfing down pancakes, and him, the man in the corner booth. He'd been there for 2 hours, a ghost, in a worn-out tweed jacket, nursing the same cup of black coffee. He wasn't a problem, quiet, unassuming, asked for nothing. But his stillness was unnerving in the diner's chaotic symphony. He just watched his gaze sweeping over the room with an unnerving, analytical calm. Khloe pegged him as a retired professor or a writer, struggling with a block. He had kind eyes, she noted, but they were tired, clouded, with a profound loneliness she recognized, because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. The bell above the door chimed aggressively, announcing an arrival that shifted the diner's atmosphere from merely busy to tense. In strode a man in his late 30s, clad in a suit so sharp it could have cut glass. He talked loudly into a Bluetooth earpiece, words like leveraging assets and hostile takeover slicing through the morning chatter. He oozed an impatient, slick arrogance that set Khloe's teeth on edge. He snapped his fingers to get her attention. Not waved, not called out. Snapped. Espresso double. And make it quick. I've got a call with Tokyo in 10. He barked, not even looking at her as he slid into a booth. Khloe forced a tight, professional smile. Coming right up, sir. As she turned, she noticed Arthur shuffling through the door. Arthur was a fixture in this part of downtown. An older man, his face a road map of hard years, his beard tangled and grey. He was a veteran, she'd learned from snippets of conversation. He never begged, never caused trouble. Sometimes, on the coldest days, Khloe's boss, Sal, would let him sit in a back booth to warm up, and Khloe would slip him a bowl of soup, marking it as a kitchen mistake. Today, Arthur just looked cold. He clutched a bundle of newspapers to his chest and made his way to the back away from everyone. But the man in the suit, let's call him Mr. Bluetooth, saw him. His face twisted in disgust. "Oh, for crying out loud," he said, loudly pulling the earpiece out. "Sal, You running a diner or a flop house? I'm trying to close a multi-million-dollar deal here, and I have to smell that. He gestured toward Arthur with a flick of his wrist as if shooing away a fly. Sal, a burly man, whose gruff exterior hid a marshmallow heart, came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He's not bothering anyone, Chad. Just warming up. He's bothering me. Chad shot back, his voice rising. His presence is devaluing my breakfast experience. Get him out of here, or I'm reporting you to the health department. I'm sure they'd be interested in your clientele. The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. Sal's face hardened, but Khloe could see the fear in his eyes. A bad report, a temporary shutdown, it could ruin him. The diner fell silent. The college students stared. The construction workers stopped chewing. Arthur, hearing the commotion, began to slowly, painfully pull himself up. His eyes, filled with a shame that broke Khloe's heart, were fixed on the floor. He was going to leave, to retreat back into the cold anonymity of the street. Something inside Khloe snapped. It was the exhaustion, the frustration, the sheer grinding injustice of it all. It was the memory of her own father, a kind, gentle man being chewed up and spit out by a world that valued profit over people. She walked over to Chad's table, her hands trembling slightly. She placed his double espresso down with a firm, deliberate click. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice, low but clear, cutting through the silence. Chad looked up, surprised at being addressed. "What that man Khloe said, nodding towards Arthur, is named Arthur. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He is not a that. He is a person. And he is welcome here." Chad scoffed, a smirk playing on his lips. "Oh, I see. We've got a little bleeding heart here. Is this part of the service, a side of social justice with my coffee?" "Listen, sweetheart, I don't care if he's Santa Claus. I'm a paying customer, and he's not. He needs to go. He's my customer." Khloe lied, her voice gaining strength. "I'm buying his breakfast this morning. So if you have a problem with the clientele, you have a problem with me." A wave of murmurs went through the diner. Arthur had frozen his head, slowly lifting to look at Khloe, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning gratitude. Sal gave Khloe a look, part warning, part admiration. Chad's face flushed a deep, angry red. "Is that so? You're paying for him with what your $2 tips?" He laughed, a cruel, braying sound. "Fine. You want to stand up for the bum, you can join him. You're a terrible waitress, anyway." He threw a $5 bill on the table. "Keep the change. Maybe you can buy him a cup of coffee to go with his dignity." He stood, adjusted his tie, and stormed out of the diner, resuming his loud phone conversation as the door swung shut behind him. The silence he left was deafening. Then one of the construction workers started to clap, a slow, deliberate rhythm. Soon the college students joined in. A soft, warm wave of applause filled the small diner. Khloe's face burned a mix of embarrassment and a strange, fierce pride. She walked over to Arthur, who was still standing, looking at her with watery eyes. "Please, Arthur, sit. Have some breakfast." "On me." I can't let you do that, miss." He rasped, his voice rough with disuse. "It's already done," she said, with a gentle smile. "Now what'll it be?" "The pancakes are good today." From the corner booth, the quiet man watched the entire exchange. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those tired, kind eyes, were fixed on Khloe. He watched as she took Arthur's order, as she treated him with the same respect she'd have shown a king. He saw the tremor in her hands that she tried to hide. He saw the steel in her spine. He quietly finished his coffee, stood up, and walked to the counter where Khloe was ringing up an order. He placed a few bills down to cover his coffee. She was about to give him his change when he slid another bill across the counter, folded neatly in half. "This is for you," he said, his voice surprisingly deep and resonant. "For your trouble." "Oh, sir, that's really not necessary," she stammered, looking at the bill. "It was 100. She'd have to work a whole day to make that." "I insist," he said, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, she felt as though he could see right through her, past the uniform, past the exhaustion, and into the messy, chaotic core of her life. Character is a currency far too rare in this world. It should be rewarded. He gave a slight nod and walked out, leaving Khloe staring at the $100 bill. She started to call after him, but he was already gone. With a sigh, she picked it up, her mind already calculating. This would cover the late fee on the electricity bill. It was a drop in the ocean of her debt, but for today, it was a lifeline. She unfolded the bill to put it in the register. Tucked inside was a business card. It was thick, expensive cardstock, embossed with a simple, elegant logo, a stylized S. Below it was a name, Richard Sterling, and below the name, a handwritten note in sharp black ink. "Your compassion did not go unnoticed. I believe people like you should be managing foundations, not coffee pots. If you're interested in a change, call this number. Ask for Evelyn." Khloe stared at the card. Richard Sterling. The name tickled the edges of her memory. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling as she typed the name into the search bar. The results loaded, and the air left her lungs. Richard Sterling, CEO and founder of Sterling Industries, one of the largest private equity firms in the world. A multi-billionaire, a titan of industry, a man whose face was occasionally plastered on the cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. The photos showed a man with sharp suits, a commanding presence, and iron-grey hair. A much older, more powerful version of the quiet, lonely man in the tweed jacket. Khloe sank onto a stool, the diner's noise fading into a dull roar in her ears. The business card felt like it was burning a hole in her hand. It had to be a joke, a prank, a cruel twist of fate. Billionaires didn't sit in greasy spoons drinking stale coffee. They didn't witness arguments between waitresses and arrogant stockbrokers, and they certainly didn't offer jobs on the back of business cards. And yet, those eyes, the quiet authority, the way he said, "Character is a currency." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Was this real? Could this possibly be real? The $100 bill in her hand was real. The memory of his intense gaze was real. The phone number on the card was real. For the first time in years, a tiny, terrifying flicker of hope ignited in the cold, dark corners of her heart. For 3 days, the business card lived in Khloe's pocket. It was a constant, heavy presence, a rectangular "what if" that she traced with her thumb during lulls at the diner. She showed it to her best friend, Maria, a no-nonsense nursing student who worked 2 jobs herself. A billionaire. In Sal's diner, Maria had squinted at the card, turning it over as if looking for a hidden camera. "Khloe, this has to be a scam. Or worse, some creepy old rich guy's way of hitting on you. Don't call. Throw it away." Part of Khloe agreed. It was too fantastical, too much like a movie plot to be real. Billionaires were abstract concepts, headlines about stock markets and space races. They weren't lonely old men in tweed jackets. Her life was about tangible problems, her mother's mounting medical bills, the landlord's threatening letters. Her mother, Claire, was in a state-run facility, the best Khloe could afford. But it was understaffed, and Claire's early-onset Alzheimer's was progressing rapidly. Every time Khloe visited, a little more of her mother had faded away, leaving behind a confused, frightened stranger in a familiar body. The doctors said specialized memory care with targeted therapies and constant engagement could slow the decline. But that kind of care cost more per month than Khloe made in a year. That was the thought that kept circling back, smothering her skepticism. What if it was real? What if this was the 1 in a billion chance, the statistical anomaly that could pull her and her mother out of the quicksand on the 4th day with a knot of dread and hope tightening in her stomach? She locked herself in the bathroom of her apartment, the only place with any privacy, and dialed the number. She fully expected a disconnected line or a gruff security guard telling her to get lost. Instead, a crisp professional voice answered on the first ring. Mr. Sterling's private office. Evelyn speaking. Khloe's own voice came out as a squeak. Hello. My name is Khloe Miller. I was given a card and told to call this number. There was a pause, but it wasn't dismissive. It was controlled, measured. Miss Miller. Yes. Mr. Sterling mentioned you might be in touch. He was very impressed by you. Khloe's heart did a painful lurch. It was real. The man in the diner, the offer. It was all real. Impressed by me, she stammered, leaning against the cold tile wall for support. I was just doing my job. He believes you demonstrated integrity and compassion under pressure. Qualities he values highly, Evelyn said, her tone meticulously neutral. He has a proposition for you. Mr. Sterling is in the process of restructuring his family's philanthropic branch, the Sterling Foundation. He's looking for people with a ground-level perspective. People who understand need not just spreadsheets. A foundation, Khloe thought of her unfinished art degree, her waitressing uniform hanging on the back of the door. But I don't have any experience in that. I have no qualifications. Mr. Sterling believes some qualifications can't be taught in a university, Evelyn replied smoothly. He would like to meet with you, not as an interview in the traditional sense. More of a conversation. Would you be available to come to the Sterling Tower tomorrow at 10 a.m., Sterling Tower? The gleaming black skyscraper downtown that scraped the clouds, a monument to a level of wealth Khloe couldn't even comprehend. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I'll be there. The next morning, Khloe stood before the monolith of glass and steel, feeling like an ant at the foot of Mount Olympus. She had spent an hour agonizing over what to wear, finally settling on the one black blazer she owned, bought years ago for a college presentation, paired with her nicest, least faded pair of jeans. It felt woefully inadequate as she watched women in tailored Chanel suits and men with $1,000 shoes stride through the revolving doors. Taking a deep breath, she walked in. The lobby was cavernous, a cathedral of marble and chrome. The air hummed with a quiet, efficient power. Intimidated but determined, she approached the main reception desk. The receptionist, a woman who looked more like a model, gave her a brief, dismissive glance until Khloe mentioned Evelyn's name. The woman's demeanor instantly shifted. She smiled warmly and pointed her toward a private elevator bank. Evelyn was waiting for her on the 80th floor. She was a woman in her 50s, with impeccably styled silver hair and an air of formidable competence. She wasn't cold, but she was guarded, her eyes appraising Khloe from the moment the elevator doors opened. "Miss Miller, welcome. Please come this way." She didn't lead Khloe to a grand office. Instead, she took her to a small, comfortable conference room with a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a breathtaking, dizzying view of the city. There was a simple table with 2 chairs. No Richard Sterling. "Mr. Sterling has been unexpectedly detained," Evelyn said, gesturing for Khloe to sit. "He apologizes profusely. He asked me to begin the conversation in his stead." Disappointment warred with relief in Khloe's chest. For the next hour, Evelyn asked questions. They were not the typical interview questions Khloe had expected. There was no, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" or "What's your biggest weakness?" Instead, Evelyn's questions were subtle, probing, and deeply personal. Tell me about the art you used to create. What does the word community mean to you? You mentioned your mother. Describe her. If you were given $1 million with the condition that you couldn't spend any of it on yourself or your family, what would you do with it? Khloe, initially nervous, found herself opening up. She spoke of her passion for portraits, for capturing the hidden stories in a person's face. She talked about her mother before the illness, a vibrant woman who taught her how to find beauty in small things. For the $1 million question, she didn't hesitate. I'd find a way to help people like Arthur, she said, the ones who fall through the cracks. It's not just about a meal or a bed for the night. It's about dignity. I'd set up a center that offered not just shelter, but job training mental health services for veterans and maybe an art therapy program. A way for them to tell their own stories. Evelyn listened intently, her face giving nothing away. She just made small notes on a tablet. Finally, she stood up. Thank you for your time, Miss Miller. This has been very enlightening. We will be in touch. And that was it. Khloe was escorted back to the elevator, her mind reeling. It felt less like an interview and more like a psychological evaluation. She was certain she had failed. She had been too honest, too emotional. These were people who dealt in numbers and logic, not feelings and art therapy for the homeless. As she stepped out of the elevator and back into the marble lobby, a man in a hurry, texting on his phone, bumped into her hard, sending her purse flying, its contents her wallet keys, a half-eaten granola bar, and the crumpled business card scattered across the polished floor. Hey, watch it, he snapped, barely glancing at her before continuing on his way. As Khloe knelt to gather her things, fuming at his rudeness, another man stopped to help her. He was young, impeccably dressed in a designer suit, with slicked back hair and a handsome, arrogant face she'd seen before. It was Chad, the man from the diner. His eyes widened in recognition, and a slow, cruel smirk spread across his face. Well, well, well. Look what the cat dragged in. The little waitress with a hero complex. What are you doing here? Did you come to scrub the floors? Khloe's face flushed with heat. That's none of your business. Oh, I think it is, he said, leaning against a marble pillar, enjoying her discomfort. He lowered his voice. Let me guess. You tracked down the old man from the diner, didn't you? The one who gave you the tip. You saw a rich guy and thought you'd hit the jackpot. Let me give you some advice, sweetheart. Guys like that. They don't waste their time on charity cases from greasy spoons. You're out of your league. Before Khloe could form a reply, Evelyn's voice cut through the air like ice. Is there a problem here? Damian Chad or Damian straightened up instantly, his smirk vanishing, replaced by a mask of polite deference. Evelyn. No problem at all. I was just welcoming a visitor. Evelyn's gaze was glacial. She looked from Damian to the scattered contents of Khloe's purse on the floor, and then to Khloe's humiliated face. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Damian, she said, her voice dangerously soft. This is Khloe Miller. She is here as a guest of your father. I suggest you find somewhere else to be. The color drained from Damian's face. He stared at Khloe, his mouth slightly agape, a cocktail of shock, confusion, and dawning fury in his eyes. He was Richard Sterling's son, the arrogant man from the diner. Chad was Damian Sterling. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stalked away, his back rigid with anger. Evelyn turned to Khloe, her expression softening for the first time. My sincerest apologies, Miss Miller. That was unfortunate. Damian can be abrasive. Khloe was still processing the revelation. He's his son, yes, Evelyn said with a sigh. Now I know I said Mr. Sterling was detained. That was not entirely true. I apologize for the deception. She gestured back toward the private elevator. The final part of your interview is this way. Confused and shaken, Khloe followed Evelyn back into the elevator. They ascended one more floor to the penthouse. The doors opened directly into a vast, sun-drenched office that was more like a luxury apartment. Books lined every wall. Modern art hung in stark contrast to antique furniture, and through a wall of glass, a private terrace overlooked the entire city. And there, sitting in a leather armchair, not in a suit but in a comfortable cashmere sweater and slacks, was Richard Sterling, the quiet man from the diner. He rose as she entered, a small, apologetic smile on his face. Miss Miller. Khloe. Please forgive the theatrics, he said, his voice the same deep, resonant tone she remembered. Evelyn's questions, my absence, even, I'm sorry to say, my son's predictable boorishness. It was all a test. Khloe stared at him, speechless. I've spent a lifetime building an empire, he continued, his gaze direct and unwavering, and it has surrounded me with people who want something from me. People who tell me what I want to hear. I've grown weary of it. In the diner, I saw something I haven't seen in a very long time, genuine, uncalculated integrity. But I had to be sure. I had to know if that character, held up under pressure, away from the heat of the moment. He gestured to a screen on his desk, which showed a discreet video feed of the conference room she had just left. He had been watching the entire time. I needed to see if you were authentic, he said. I needed to know if you were the real thing. And you, Khloe Miller, are the realest thing I've encountered in decades. He walked over to his desk and picked up a folder. I want to offer you a position. A director of community outreach for the Sterling Foundation. Your primary role will be to identify grassroots organizations and individuals who are making a real difference. People the spreadsheets and algorithms always miss. People like you. He slid the folder across the desk. The starting salary is $200,000 a year. Khloe's knees felt weak. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. $200,000. It was an astronomical, life-altering number. It was her mother's care. It was a new apartment. It was freedom. But that's not all, Richard said, his expression turning serious. I know about your mother's condition. The foundation will cover in its entirety her transfer and continued care at the finest memory care facility in the state Willow Creek Manor. And we will also fund the completion of your art degree at the institute of your choice. We will consider it a professional development investment. Tears welled in Khloe's eyes, hot and uncontrollable. After years of fighting, of scraping by, of suffocating under the weight of it all, here was a hand reaching down, not just to pull her out, but to lift her into the sky. Why she whispered the word thick with emotion. Why me, Richard Sterling, looked out the window at the city sprawling beneath them. Because my wife Isabella died 3 years ago. She was the heart of our family, the soul of my life. She believed that wealth was a responsibility, not a privilege. Since she's been gone, I've felt lost, adrift in a world of my own making. My son, as you've seen, has embraced the power, but forgotten the purpose. He turned back to her, his eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored her own. In that diner, when you stood up for that man, you reminded me of her. You reminded me of what's important. This isn't just about changing your life, Khloe. It's about you helping me change mine. It's about helping me find my way back. He extended his hand. So what do you say, Miss Miller? Are you ready to manage something more than coffee pots? Through her tears, Khloe looked at his outstretched hand, then at the folder containing a future she never dared to dream of. The decision was already made. With a trembling hand, she reached out and shook his. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with a conviction that surprised them both. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. I am." Khloe Miller's life transformed with a velocity that felt both exhilarating and unreal. The shift from the scent of burnt bacon to the subtle, expensive fragrance of the Sterling Tower lobby was a form of sensory whiplash. One moment she was counting tips to see if she could afford milk. The next, she was the Sterling Foundation's new director of community outreach, a title that felt like a borrowed costume she might have to return at any moment. Evelyn Richards' impeccably efficient chief of staff managed the transition with surgical precision. The most immediate and profound change was for her mother. Within a week, Claire Miller was moved from the bleak, understaffed state facility to Willow Creek Manor. When Khloe visited for the first time, she was overcome. Willow Creek was a sanctuary of light and peace, with lush gardens, sun-drenched rooms, and a staff that treated residents with a gentle, unhurried respect. During that first visit, as her mother sat by a window overlooking a rose garden, Claire turned to her, her eyes momentarily clear of the fog of Alzheimer's. "It's beautiful here, honey," she murmured, a flicker of the woman she used to be. Khloe wept with a gratitude so profound it was physically painful. The mountain of guilt she had carried for years began to crumble. Her own life was rebuilt from the ground up. The foundation provided a housing allowance that moved her from a tiny drafty apartment into a clean, modern condo with large windows and reliable heating. She enrolled in night classes at the prestigious Chamberlain Art Institute, stepping back into a world of charcoal and canvas that she thought was lost to her forever. At work, she thrived. Freed from the constant anxiety of poverty, her mind was sharp, her instincts clear. She was Richard Sterling's scout for authenticity, his eyes and ears on the ground. She bypassed the large, glossy charities and instead found the real frontline heroes, a women's shelter operating out of a church basement, a volunteer-run literacy program for at-risk youth, a small clinic providing free dental care to the elderly. She had a unique authority when she spoke. She wasn't guessing what these organizations needed, she knew. Richard trusted her judgment, implicitly approving her funding proposals without question. She made good on her promise to herself and found Arthur. Through a veterans support group funded by the foundation, she helped him get into transitional housing and connected him with the PTSD counseling he had desperately needed for years. One afternoon, Arthur appeared in the gleaming lobby of Sterling Tower. He was clean-shaven, wearing a new coat, his eyes bright and steady. He simply held out his hand to her. "I don't have the words, miss," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just give me a meal. You gave me back my life." In that moment, Khloe felt a sense of purpose so deep it solidified her new reality. This was real. But every gilded cage has its shadows, and the darkest one was cast by Damian Sterling. From the beginning, Damian treated her with a venomous disdain. He saw her not as a colleague, but as a cunning interloper who had expertly played on his father's loneliness. In board meetings, he would publicly question her proposals with slick, condescending remarks. "Miss Miller, while your sentiment is quaint." He once sneered over her plan to fund an art therapy program at a youth center. "The ROI on finger painting seems negligible. We are a philanthropic foundation, not a babysitting service." Khloe did her best to ignore him, pouring her energy into her work and her art. Her relationship with Richard deepened into a genuine friendship. He became the mentor and father figure she hadn't realized how much she'd missed. They would often talk for hours, not about spreadsheets, but about art ethics and the responsibility that came with great wealth. He seemed to be finding his own way, back from a fog of grief, and she was his guide. This easy camaraderie, however, was poison to Damian. In his transactional world, genuine connection was a myth. He saw their friendship as a long con, a strategic campaign by Khloe to secure her position, and ultimately a piece of the sterling fortune. His birthright, he felt, was under siege by a waitress. His paranoia festered, growing into a cold, calculated rage. He decided he had to expose her for the fraud he was certain she was. He hired Kenji Tanaka, a discreet but ruthless private investigator, known for unearthing secrets that were buried deep. "I want everything on her," Damian instructed Tanaka in a hushed meeting. "Khloe Miller, every ex-boyfriend, every late credit card payment, every skeleton in her family's closet. Find the dirt. Nobody is that clean." Weeks went by and Tanaka's reports were disappointingly thin. Khloe's life was a testament to hardship and quiet dignity. There were no scandals, no hidden vices. She was exactly who she appeared to be. The investigator found a mountain of medical bills, student loan statements, and a spotless, if humble, work history. Damian grew furious. "Dig deeper," he commanded Tanaka over the phone. "Look at her parents, her family. Everyone has a weak spot. Find it following the new directive." Tanaka shifted his focus to Khloe's past. And that's when he found the ghost. The ghost's name was Daniel Miller, Khloe's deceased father. Khloe's memories of her father were fragmented, softened by the gauze of childhood. He had died in a car crash when she was 12. Her mother always spoke of him as a brilliant but unlucky salesman, a charming dreamer, always on the verge of his next big success. Khloe had always believed his untimely death was the sole catalyst for their family's financial ruin. The truth, as Tanaka's investigation revealed, was far darker. Daniel Miller was more than a dreamer. He was a grifter, a talented con artist who specialized in selling hope and disappearing with the investment. He operated in the gray areas of the law, and his victims were often too embarrassed or intimidated to press charges, leaving him with a clean criminal record, but a long trail of financial wreckage. Then Tanaka found the connection. It was the dagger Damian had been searching for, the one piece of information that could destroy Khloe utterly. 20 years prior, Daniel Miller, operating under the alias David Monroe, had orchestrated his masterwork scam. He created a shell corporation called Innovant Technologies, complete with glossy brochures and a P.O. box address promising a revolutionary data compression software that didn't exist. He convinced a group of eager investors to pour more than $2 million into the phantom company before he vanished with every cent. One of the primary investors, a boutique tech firm that lost nearly $500,000 and was almost bankrupted by the fraud, was called Cygnus Data. 5 years after that devastating loss, a rapidly expanding private equity firm acquired the struggling Cygnus Data. That firm was Sterling Industries. Kenji Tanaka presented his findings to Damian in a slim, leather-bound report. As Damian read it, a slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. It was more perfect than he could have ever imagined. Khloe Miller, his father's paragon of integrity, was the daughter of the man who had stolen from his own company. The irony was poetic. The optics were catastrophic. The headlines wrote themselves, "Sterling Foundation's new director, daughter of fraudster who scammed Sterling's subsidiary." It would be a corporate and public relations nightmare. It would shatter Khloe's credibility, and more importantly, it would humiliate his father, forcing him to admit his judgment was fatally flawed. It would prove once and for all that Damian's cynical worldview was the correct one. He decided to hold his weapon until the moment it would do the most damage. That moment would be the annual Sterling Foundation Gala, the glittering pinnacle of the city's social calendar. The night of the gala arrived full of promise. Khloe, nervous but radiant in her first ever evening gown, felt the evening was a celebration of her new life. Richard greeted her with a warm, paternal smile, his pride in her evident to everyone. The ballroom was full, the champagne flowed, and for the first time, Khloe felt she truly belonged in this world. As Richard finished his glowing speech, singling her out as the Foundation's vital new heart, she felt a profound sense of peace. It was in that perfect moment of arrival, as she sat at the head table bathed in applause, that Damian Sterling chose to strike. He rose slowly from his chair, a faint, cruel smile on his lips, and gently tapped his champagne glass with a spoon, calling for silence. The grand ballroom of the Sterling Plaza Hotel was a universe away from the morning grind diner. Glimmering with crystal and awash in champagne, it was the triumphant setting for the annual Sterling Foundation Gala. For Khloe, it was the culmination of a year that had reshaped her existence. In an elegant navy gown, she felt a sense of belonging she had never thought possible. Richard Sterling, beaming with pride, had called her the new heart of the foundation in his opening speech, and for the first time, Khloe felt she was standing on solid ground. The illusion shattered when Damian Sterling rose, tapping a glass for attention. A predatory stillness fell over the room as he began to speak, his voice a silken weapon. "Father, thank you for those inspiring words." Damian began, his eyes finding Khloe's across the table. "I too wish to celebrate our new director of outreach. She has brought a unique perspective. In fact, her family has a long history with the spirit of enterprise." A knot of pure dread tightened in Khloe's stomach. Richard watched his son, his face hardening into a wary mask. "You see, Damian continued reveling in the moment. I believe in due diligence. And I discovered that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." He raised his phone, and the large screens behind him flickered to life. An old photograph of a handsome, smiling man appeared. It was Khloe's father. "This is Daniel Miller, Khloe's father," Damian announced, his voice dripping with venomous pity. Also known as David Monroe, a charming salesman who 20 years ago defrauded a group of investors in a scam called Innovant Technologies. One of his primary victims was a company named Cygnus Data, a company which is now a valued part of the Sterling Industries portfolio. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. The air crackled with shock as Damian projected documents, old articles, irrefutable proof. Khloe felt the blood drain from her face, the room tilting violently. A con man, a thief, the story of her life, the noble struggle of her mother after her father's tragic death was a lie. Her entire history was a fraud. "So you see," Damian concluded, turning to his father with a triumphant smirk, "it seems we haven't just hired a waitress. We've brought the legacy of a man who stole from us right into the heart of our own foundation." A truly touching story. Khloe sat frozen, the target of 1,000 eyes, now filled with suspicion and contempt. The beautiful gown felt like a costume for her own public execution. The life she had built was a house of cards, and Damian had just blown it down with a single poisoned breath. But in the depths of that humiliation, something forged in years of hardship refused to break. Her pride, the one thing that was truly hers, ignited. She pushed her chair back, the screech of its legs the only sound in the silent room. She stood trembling but resolute. She did not look at Damian. Her gaze was fixed on Richard. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I was unaware of my father's history. If what your son says is true, then I am sorry for the actions of a man I barely knew." She took a steadying breath, her eyes unwavering. "When you hired me, you spoke of character. You said it was a rare currency. I believe that character is not inherited. It is built. It is earned. Her eyes flicked momentarily to Damian, dismissing him. And it cannot be tarnished by the sins of others. Looking back to Richard, she conveyed a world of sadness and resolve. I will not be a weapon in your family's war, and I will not have my integrity questioned because of a past that is not mine. Effective immediately, I resign. She reached down, picked up her small place card and set it gently on the table. Then, with her head held high, she turned and walked out of the ballroom. The heavy doors swung shut behind her, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Damian's victory was short-lived. He had expected tears, denials, begging. He had not expected this quiet, unbreakable dignity. By refusing to play his game, she had checkmated him. Then Richard Sterling rose to his full height, his anger a palpable force that silenced the room. He looked at his son, his love eclipsed by a profound, glacial disappointment. "You," Richard said, his voice low and dangerous. "You have never understood. Father, I did what was necessary." "Necessary?" Richard's voice cut through the air. "You call this public ambush necessary? You humiliated a good woman to prove a pathetic point, and all you have proven is that you have learned nothing from me or from your mother." He turned to the silent crowd. "My wife used to say, a person's true character is shown in how they face defeat. You all just witnessed a display of character tonight. But it did not come from a man who shares my name." He looked back at Damian, his voice dropping to a whisper of finality. "Your mother's heart would be broken. So concerned with your inheritance, you've forgotten how to be a decent human being. Let me be clear, the only inheritance worth having is one of character, and you have just proven yourself bankrupt." With a final damning look, Richard turned his back on his son. "Evelyn," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority, "this gala is over." He then strode purposefully towards the doors through which Khloe had vanished. He found her by the elevators, her composure finally shattered, tears streaming down her face as she jabbed at the call button. "Khloe," he said gently. She spun around, trying to hide her face. "Please, Mr. Sterling, just let me go." "You have nothing to be sorry for." He insisted, his own voice thick with emotion. "I am the one who is sorry. For my son's cruelty. For putting you in this position." "It doesn't matter," she choked out. "He was right. I'm a liability. I can't work for you now." "To hell with optics," Richard said, the fire returning to his eyes. "I told you I hired you for your character. Did you think that was just a pretty line? What your father did was his shadow. Khloe, not yours. You are defined by the choices you make. Your choice to defend a stranger, to speak truth, to power to walk away with your integrity. Intact, that is the character of kings. That is the character of my wife. That is the character I choose to align myself with." The elevator arrived, its doors sliding open, an escape pod to her old life. "Your resignation," Richard said softly but firmly, "is respectfully and vehemently rejected. The job is still yours. My belief in you has not changed, but the choice as always is yours." Khloe looked from Richard's earnest face to the open elevator. Then, with a final shuddering breath, she turned away from the escape route and let the doors slide shut, leaving her standing with the one man who had seen her for exactly who she was. The aftermath of the gala was a quiet storm. Damian Sterling, publicly rebuked by his father, vanished from the foundation and from public life. The city's elite buzzed with gossip, but Richard Sterling, insulated by his immense power and newfound conviction, ignored it all. He issued a single terse press release stating that the Sterling Foundation had full and unwavering confidence in director Khloe Miller, whose integrity and vision are invaluable to our mission. It was a declaration of war to his son, and a shield for Khloe. The first few weeks were difficult. Khloe felt the weight of the whispers, the sideways glances from some of the staff. But Richard was her unshakable ally. He made it a point to include her in every high-level meeting, to solicit her opinion publicly, to show in no uncertain terms that she was not just an employee, but a trusted partner. Her own resilience combined with Richard's fierce loyalty slowly won over the doubters. Her work spoke for itself. The programs she had initiated were flourishing, producing tangible results that even the most cynical board members couldn't ignore. Their relationship deepened, evolving beyond mentor and mentee. They were comrades, allies in a shared mission. He taught her about the complex world of finance and philanthropy, and she in turn retaught him about the world outside his skyscraper. She took him to the soup kitchen she used to volunteer at, not for a photo op, but to serve food. She introduced him to the ex-Marine who ran a boxing gym for troubled kids in a rough neighborhood. She showed him the human ROI on his investments. One afternoon she came into his office with a proposal. It was for a new, ambitious initiative. The Phoenix Project, she called it. It's a comprehensive support system for people like Arthur. But it goes further. It's for anyone who has fallen through the societal cracks, veteran single parents, fleeing domestic abuse, non-violent offenders re-entering society. It provides housing, yes, but also holistic support. Mental health care, addiction, counseling, vocational training, financial literacy courses, and... She hesitated for a moment. And an arts and storytelling wing. A place for people to process their trauma and reclaim their own narratives. It was the dream she had described to Evelyn on her first day, now fully formed, backed by research and a solid plan. Richard looked over the detailed proposal, a slow smile spreading across his face. This is a legacy project, Khloe. This is what Isabella always dreamed of building. He looked up at her, his eyes shining. And you will be its architect. I'm giving you a $50 million seed fund and full autonomy to build it from the ground up. Over the next year, Khloe poured her soul into the Phoenix Project. She assembled a team of social workers, therapists, and teachers. She found an old, abandoned warehouse district by the river, and with the help of a team of architects, transformed it into a beautiful, functional campus. It was a place of hope, built not just with sterling money, but with Khloe's deep, empathetic understanding of what people truly needed, not a handout, but a hand up. On the day of the campus dedication, the sun was bright. The crowd was not filled with the city's elite, but with community leaders, volunteers, and the first group of residents who would call the Phoenix Project home. Arthur, now a peer counselor for the project's Veterans Wing, stood beside her, his presence a living testament to the journey. Richard gave the opening remarks, but he kept them brief. "I am just the banker," he said with a smile. "The true architect of this new legacy is here." He called Khloe to the podium. Khloe looked out at the faces in the crowd, her heart full. She spoke not of charity, but of solidarity. She spoke of the inherent worth in every individual and the power of a second chance. Her voice, once timid, was now filled with the quiet confidence of a leader. As she finished her speech to thunderous applause, she saw a figure standing at the far back of the crowd, partially hidden by a tree. It was Damian. He looked different, thinner. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, haunted look. He wasn't there to cause trouble. He just watched his expression, a complex mix of regret, longing, and perhaps a flicker of pride. He caught her eye for a brief moment, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and then turned and walked away. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of a possibility. A few months later, the Chamberlain Art Institute held its graduate showcase. In the center of the main gallery hung Khloe's final piece. It was a massive canvas, a triptych. The left panel was a dark, chaotic swirl of greys and blacks, depicting the frantic energy and despair of the morning grind diner. The right panel was a portrait of her father, not as a con man, but as she chose to remember him, a smiling, charming, tragic figure rendered in fractured, ghost-like lines. But the central panel was the largest and most vibrant. It was a stunning photorealistic portrait of Arthur, the homeless veteran. He was sitting on a park bench, bathed in warm morning light. He wasn't looking at the viewer. His gaze was fixed on something in the distance, and on his face was a look of serene, hard-won peace. The title of the piece was engraved on a small plaque below character A currency. Khloe stood off to the side, watching as people gathered around her work. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Richard. "Isabella would have loved this," he said softly, his eyes on the painting. "She would have loved you." Khloe leaned her head against his shoulder, no longer as employee and employer, but as family. Forged not by blood, but by a shared belief in the currency of kindness. She had lost a father to a painful truth, but had found another in the most unlikely of places. Her life was no longer about escaping a cage, but about building a sanctuary for others and for herself. The quiet man in the corner of the diner hadn't just changed her life, he had given her the tools to change the world, one act of compassion at a time. And she was just getting started. Khloe's story reminds us that our circumstances do not have to define our character. The world told her she was a poor waitress, the daughter of a thief, someone to be dismissed. But her own actions told a different story. She chose compassion over cynicism, integrity over opportunity, and dignity over despair. She proves that the most powerful investment we can ever make is in the goodness of other people. Richard Sterling had billions, but his greatest fortune was realizing that true value isn't found in a stock portfolio, but in a single uncalculated act of kindness in a greasy spoon diner. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of character, then help us share it. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder that good people still exist, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will restore your faith in humanity. What would you have done in Khloe's position? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for watching.